Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com. How to make acrylic knife scales from pen blank material. Now this acrylic pen blank material comes in a variety of different colors, designs. It comes in blocks, inch and a half by inch and a half by about 5.5 in length. It's a very interesting material to work with. It cuts a little bit harder than wood does, but it grinds just as easily. Now I started by running over to my friend Jay's shop, and he sliced these blocks for me. We sliced them 5/16 thick. I think if you went 1/4 inch thick, you'd get 4 out of each one. Which would be nice, but we did them 5/16, so we got 3 out of each block. Here's the sample of the colors that are available. Now for this particular project, this is my first time working with the acrylic scales. I wanted to add some paper micarta liners. So basically I wanted to end up with this purple acrylic scales with yellow and black liners. I cleaned off the scales first with an alcohol wipe just to degrease them, to make sure that the fiberglass or the micarta would stick adequately. Then I'm just making some paper micarta. I have some black construction paper and also some yellow. I cut out some small squares, and just while wearing gloves, using a paintbrush, I'm just going to completely saturate each piece of paper and lay them on top of each other. Now I notice that I've got some parchment paper down, and that's on top of a piece of glass. So it's a very flat surface, and the parchment paper makes it so that that fiberglass resin, or the micarta, doesn't stick to it. Now, when I say micarta liners, it's not really micarta. I'm not actually going to put this into a press and squeeze out all of the resin. All I'm going to do is lay the number of black pieces of paper and the number of yellow pieces of paper that I want. Then I'm going to coat one side of that acrylic scale material, lay it on top of the paper, and then I'm just going to weight it down. You can weigh it down with a brick. I'm going to use I think I have some pavers laying around the garage. I'm just going to put a paver on top of it just to create a little bit of pressure. And then I'm going to walk away and let that fiberglass resin harden up. Once it hardens, I'm basically ready to begin working on it. I trace out the basic shape of the handle for the knife that I'm working on. I'm going to cut this out a little bit oversized. I'm going to grind these to the actual dimensions of the knife once they're mounted. I use a pin saw to just cut out the rough outline. And as I mentioned before, it cuts a little bit harder than wood does, so it takes a little bit longer. So here I've got the scale blank already with paper micarta already glued in place with that fiberglass resin. And that's the knife that it's going to get mounted to. I'm just getting a feel for what the end result is going to look like. I'm going to mount these with the Northgard system of mounting scales. I do this most of the time when I'm using bolsters. This knife does not have brass bolsters, but I still find it worthwhile to go through this procedure in order to get these scales mounted correctly. And the procedure is very, very easy. You start by using epoxy to glue one side, or one scale onto the knife blank, or onto the knife. Then you're going to clamp it into position, and you're going to let that epoxy completely dry. Before I walk away, I can clean up any little bit of the epoxy that's oozed out, especially along the top edge, just with an alcohol wipe. And that really prevents a lot of cleaning afterwards. Once it's dry, I'm going to drill holes through it. Now notice the color on this particular drill bit. One of my viewers actually suggested using, instead of a 1/4-inch drill bit for 1/4-inch pins, he suggested using an F-size drill bit for 1/4-inch pins. It's just a little bit oversized. Instead of .250, it's .258. And he suggested marking that drill bit with some nail polish, so it makes it easy to find in the shop. But anyway, getting back to mounting these scales. So that 1/2 of the scales is glued in place onto the knife blank. I'm then going to drill the hole right through the tang and that scale. Of course, I've got that clamped to the bed of my drill press. I've got a block of wood underneath it. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the other hole. So I'm going to line up that drill bit perfectly with the existing hole through the tang of the knife, clamp everything into position, and then drill through, right through that scale material, that acrylic material. Now the next step in this Northgard system is to glue the other scale into place. I'm just going to line this up. Notice that that side does not have any holes drilled through it yet. I'm going to clamp this exactly where I want it, and again walk away and let it dry. And that's really the hardest part. This is actually an easier way of mounting scales, but you do have to have a little bit of patience. Now once that's dry, I'm going to reclamp it, and again I'm clamping onto a flat surface on the other side. Reposition the drill bit so that it's lined up through the existing hole through the first half of the knife scales. And then once that drill bit is in position and the knife is clamped again to the working surface of the drill press, then I'll turn on the drill press and drill right through the bottom set of scales. And the end result is that you get a perfectly aligned hole that goes right through not only the tang of the knife, but also both halves, or both acrylic knife handles or knife scales. The next step is very easy. I'm just going to insert some 1/4-inch pins through the scales. Going to make sure that they're completely covered with epoxy, and then I again walk away, let those dry. Now working with the acrylic really was pretty easy. It cuts a little bit harder than wood. Grinding it, about the same. The only thing that stood out in my mind is that it really stinks when you cut it, and it really stinks when you're grinding it. Definitely recommend wearing a respirator when working with this material. Smells kind of like nail polish. So I used my 2x72 grinder to start to shape the scales. I actually went back to my angle grinder, and this has a 36 grit flap sanding wheel. I found this much easier for me to start to round over those scales and shape them the way that I wanted them. And I spent the most amount of time with this angle grinder. Now, after shaping the scales like you want them, either with the belt sander or an angle grinder or however you want to do it, the next steps are pretty easy. I just used a oscillating sander with a 80 grit paper first, then I went to a 220 grit paper, then I sanded by hand with a 600 grit. It didn't take long at all, and then the last step in the sanding was with a 1000 grit emery paper. And after that, I just hit it on the buffing wheel, and it really didn't take long at all to buff these things out. So I'm just finishing shaping here with the angle grinder. A little bit of sanding. And like I mentioned before, after sanding down to 1000 grit, threw it on a buffing wheel for just a few minutes, and basically I was all finished. A very beautiful handle, relatively inexpensive. These blanks were actually pretty cheap. And what I like the most is just the variety of colors and the translucent look of it, especially when utilized with a couple of different color liners. A couple images of the finished product. Please check us out on the web at DIYEasyCrafts.com. Be sure to check out our other how-to knife making videos. And if you like this video, I ask that you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this YouTube channel.